Liz Truss, welcome to the show.
Great to be on.
When you became Prime Minister, you had a lot of ideas you wanted to implement. What were some of the main ones that you wanted to get in there?
So the main thing that I wanted to do is that Britain had been through a very long period of stagnation. Mm-hmm. Our economy wasn't getting any better. We'd had huge levels of immigration, so income per head was going down in our country. And I wanted to turn that around by reducing taxes, or at least not raising taxes, getting on with things like fracking, because our energy prices were so high, it was massively damaging industry. And to me, that was the absolute key to getting our country back on the right track, because what had been happening is that services were getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. The defence budget was getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed because Britain just wasn't earning its way in the world. So that was my number one priority.
And you came up against just impossibility. It was just impossible, barriers and things.
Well, the thing I came up against was a very powerful economic establishment who had essentially been the architects of the policy for the last 30 years and basically believed that if you keep putting taxes up, it will keep generating more revenue. They don't believe in the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve is the idea that if you put taxes up too much, people will just stop doing things. They'll start moving out of the country. They'll locate their business elsewhere. So they didn't believe in the Laffer curve. And what had also happened is huge amounts of money had been printed, particularly after the financial crisis, but also after COVID, which had created an inflationary cycle. So I was faced with a group of people who did not share my fundamental economic beliefs, which is a belief in free market economics, supply side reform, cheap energy. I think cheap energy is an absolutely vital part of having a fast growing economy. And they essentially undermined what I was trying to do.
Does that suggest we don't actually have a democracy because you elect a party and because they say they want to implement certain things, and then there are these unelected people who are in there stopping anything actually happening?
I think Britain has become less democratic, yes. I think that there is less power vested in Parliament than there used to be, which is, of course, the centre of democracy. And there's a lot more power vested in quangos like the Bank of England or the Migration Advisory Committee or the Climate Change Committee. There's more power vested in the bureaucracy itself. So one of the things Gordon Brown did is he put the Civil Service Code into law in the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, making it much harder to fire civil servants, much harder to challenge civil servants. So over time, we've gone from a situation where the Parliament was sovereign, the Prime Minister had freedom of action. Of course, a Prime Minister could be removed by their MPs, but they had freedom of action, to a situation now where politicians are operating in a very tight space. And that also includes with respect to the law. So decisions now are judicially reviewed on a regular basis. So, the recent case where Gazan immigrants are now allowed to go through the UK, through the Ukrainian scheme to the UK, that has been allowed by the judiciary. Not a single politician made that decision. So decisions that used to be the purview of elected politics now sit in the hands of the judiciary, the bureaucracy, the quangocracy, and I think that isn't democratic.
That's a problem. And the main issue when I'm walking around, I know there are so many different issues in government at the moment and in politics and geopolitics, but everyone I speak to, they come up to me and they're concerned. I've never seen people so worried. It is mass immigration, particularly around Islam and Islamism. And I think finally we're allowed to sort of talk about it. There seemed to be a 10-year period where we couldn't, and it was you're racist if you talk about it. What can people do if they, other than vote? What can they do to try and change this and make their country not, have some acceptable immigration, but not have it completely changing in the way it is?
So they do need to vote. Nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change under this government, full stop. But I can guarantee that.
So we've got 4 more years of that, is it?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Unless there's such a dire crisis that even Labour MPs decide to vote the government out. But I don't think that's very likely. I think they've got enough buffer. There's over 400 of them. They've got enough buffer. But not only do we need a new set of MPs voted in? Those MPs have to be prepared to reverse what is 40 or 50 years of law. That's how serious the situation is. They essentially have to reverse most of the major laws passed for the last 40 or 50 years.
So what are some of or what is like the main law or one of the main laws they have to
So
reverse?
one is the Human Rights Act. And this is the act that's being used. So even if an illegal immigrant has committed a crime, they won't be deported because of their human rights. So there's a recent case where a man had actually sexually abused his own children, but he was not deported, and the courts made this decision because of his right to family life. Now, I would have thought you waive your right to family life if you sexually abuse your kids, but he was not deported for that reason. So the Human Rights Act has to go, and we have to leave the European Convention of Human Rights. Both of those things have to happen. But also, the Constitution Reform Act 2005 has to be reversed, which will help make judges more accountable. So there's two separate problems. One is the law is wrong, but the other problem is that judges are now taking decisions that should be in the purview of politicians. And this was Tony Blair. Back in 2005, he created the Supreme Court, which had never existed in Britain before. He also took the power away from the Lord Chancellor to appoint judges.
Okay.
And I think this has been very important in terms of we now see a judiciary that is essentially self-appointed. They're not, the senior judiciary are no longer appointed by somebody in the cabinet. And I think that has broken the accountability in the system. So I think those are the two of the laws that need to be reversed. But, in order to really do it, you need to reverse the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, which was passed, I think, in 2010 by Gordon Brown, which is the thing that puts the Civil Service Code into law, because I think you actually need to be able to appoint senior civil servants who are willing to willing to enact the policies, like what happens in America. So this is what I'm saying. In order to just fix that problem about immigration and dealing with illegal immigration, I've just mentioned 3 laws that need to be repealed. It's more than that. We could just spend the next hour talking about the laws that need to be repealed.
Do you think there's something inherent to the type of person who wants to become a civil servant that makes them likely to be maybe a bit of a box ticker and not to really think about the controversial issues?
I wouldn't put it like that. I think the civil service was conceived, back in the 19th century. It was the Northcote-Trevelyan report that came up with the idea of an impartial civil service. And the idea was to stop corruption. But what has happened is over time, the civil service and the bureaucracy has accreted more and more power. And now they have either become a blocker to doing things, or they're positively advocating a negative agenda, whether it's Islamism, and there's evidence of that happening in the Home Office, whether it's environmental extremism, whether it's transgender ideology. So I think over time, the institutions have got captured by some of these extreme ideologies as well. I don't think it's about the character of the individuals. I've met good civil servants, I've met bad civil servants. The problem is they're just not accountable. And if the public can't kick out the people at the election who make the key decisions, then that is not democracy. That's the issue. So it's not a character assassination of any given person. It's saying that we've got a system problem here.